and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei, coming to you from Beijing on CGTN. Coming up on today's program, South Korean President Moon Jae-in meets with President Donald Trump from the United States ahead of the historic DPRK-US summit. Couldn't all systems go for the summit with Kim Jong Un after Moon's White House meeting? And the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum kicks off Thursday with a focus on building an economy of trust. Can trust be built in a time of resurging protectionism? You're watching World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. We begin today's program with South Korean President Moon Jae-in's visit to the United States. He has met with President Trump at the White House on Tuesday. Mr. Moon said South Korea will continue close coordination on developments regarding the Korean Peninsula. His visit came ahead of the historic summit between Trump and DPRK leader Kim Jong Un. Before our discussion, take a look at this.
Two presidents and allies sitting together but not talking the same language when it comes to the planned summit. US President Trump suggested a possible delay in the upcoming meeting, even as South Korea's President Moon talked as though the Singapore summit was still on track.
There are certain conditions that we want, and I think we'll get those conditions. And if we don't have the meeting. And if it doesn't happen, maybe it'll happen later. Maybe it'll happen at a different time. But we will see.
We are looking forward to the first ever US-North Korea summit, and we find ourselves standing one step closer to the dream of achieving complete denuclearization on the Korean Peninsula and world peace.
Trump talked of a changed attitude from the DPRK about getting rid of its nuclear weapons, even at one stage pointing the finger at China, suggesting something may have happened at the second meeting between President Xi and Kim Jong Un. But for both the DPRK and South Korea, Pyongyang's recent reticence stems from this man, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton, who compared the current negotiations with the DPRK to those with Libya, which gave up its nuclear weapons research in 2003. Libya's leader, Muammar Gaddafi, was overthrown and killed after a Western-backed intervention in 2011. Well, the DPRK reacted angrily to that comparison. Last week, a top DPRK official issued this statement. This is not an expression of intention to address the issue through dialogue, he said. It is essentially a manifestation of an awfully sinister move to impose on our dignified state the destiny of Libya or Iraq, which had been collapsed due to the yielding of their countries to big powers. US President Trump is rejecting the Libya model and said Tuesday he was prepared to guarantee Kim Jong Un's safety if a deal was reached. But just 3 weeks from this planned summit, and there are still deep differences about how any deal will be negotiated. The White House warns Pyongyang to essentially give up all its nuclear weapons before any economic incentives are given. Pyongyang and Seoul want a step-by-step approach that will build trust over time. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
For more discussion on Trump-Moon meeting, we are joined in Beijing by Mr. Yi Hailin, who is the director of the Center of South Asia Studies from the National Institute of International Studies at Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Welcome, sir. In Medford, we have Professor Sun Young Lee from Kim Kuk Korea Foundation of Korean Studies at Fletcher School at Tufts University. Joining us in Washington, D.C., Michael O'Hanlon, Senior Fellow with the Center for 21st Century Security and Intelligence, and also Director of Research for Foreign Policy at the Brookings Institution. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. Will the meeting between the two be able to pave the way for the summit if it is still going to take place on June 12th? Let's go to Professor Lee.
Well, Kim Jong Un has given the South Korean President Moon Jae-in some homework. In fact, I would say now Mr. Moon's visit with Mr. Trump has more meaning because coming some 25 days or so after that dramatic inter-Korean summit meeting in April, it was a little anticlimactic. There would have been no sensitive information or intelligence value added to the meeting between the two leaders. So now Mr. Moon has the onus, the homework of persuading President Trump to be more accommodating, to be more flexible, and not walk away from the meeting. And I think both Kim and Trump have political victories to be gained by effecting the actual summit, so the meeting is more likely to happen than not.
But you know, Mr. O'Hanlon, it seems that what has been happening over the days is very much not like what President Trump has been presenting to the rest of the world during the other days when he's in office. Namely, he's becoming very patient. He seems to be not easily irritated by words coming from Kim Jong Un, the North Korean partner that he has over there. Does that say much about what he has in mind of what's likely to be achieved?
Well, I think that's a very good point you've made. I agree with that. Certainly when you watch President Trump interact with some of his domestic critics here in the United States, people who are far nicer individuals than Kim Jong Un, people who have far less blood on their hands than Kim Jong Un does personally. Mr. Trump often winds up in very vitriolic and angry exchanges with a lot of Democrats and other American critics of his agenda. And therefore, to see the sort of love fest that's been going on between President Trump and President Kim has been strange, to say the least. I think there's perhaps a method to the madness, that we need to create some good atmospherics to have conversation that's even possibly going to be useful. But we have to be careful not to go too far. And in a way, I find the recent talk of putting the summit in doubt or on ice for the moment, in some ways this is reassuring to me because it feels more normal. It doesn't feel quite as out of proportion with the nature of the two governments at issue, and especially with the nature of the North Korean government. So in a way, the ratcheting down of those tensions, or the ratcheting down of that very positive atmosphere is probably inevitable. And yet, as you say, Trump is still being fairly patient with Kim. I think it's probably smart, but you're right, it's a little bit incongruous with a number of other realities.
Mr. Ye, here's the thing. The two sides have to be able to indicating to the other that they are going to address each other's concerns.
Yes.
But at the same time, this is a negotiation. Nobody wants to put their cards on the table before the cards are really becoming real. So that's a very delicate balance one would keep. How far, so far rather, Mr. Ye, how do you think the two sides have been making that balance?
I think currently the two sides already send some signal or information to their partners to launch a test. One case is the joint drill. Recently, spontaneously happened in Korean Peninsula, while the two sides are preparing for the summit in Singapore. But we should notice that this joint drill is very often, it's very frequent and normal case. So probably the suspend of the high-level talks between the South and the North is only a test released by the North, try to show their attitude. But I would like to remind another dangerous signal, that President Donald Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. And this this probably caused some negative impact to the North part, because obviously the DPRK will worry about if they make the deal with the United States, and then in the future America withdraw again, what will happen? At that time, when they dismantle their nuclear bomb, there were a lot of issues. But one thing probably positive, that is this idea, make the deal with the DPRK, is the idea of the President Trump. It's not the idea from the Democratic. So also has some potential the White House will fulfill this commitment. So it's a lot of uncertainty.
Professor Lee, what about that balance from your perspective? You want to do the indication, but you don't want to show the real cards. But you have to do the indication in reflection of the cards that you want to play, or you have to play.
As for walking away from the Iran deal, of course it raises questions of U.S. credibility in the future with respect to other agreements. At the same time, we know that North Korea also, or moreover, North Korea has violated blatantly both the letter and spirit of every major international agreement. So we should not forget that there are questions of credibility about North Korean compliance.
Well, this is another competition of discredibility as we are speaking right now. But let me go to the most important question also. Mr. O'Hanlon, from now till June the 12th, if there is going to be any June the 12th summit, what do you think are some of the likely stages while we are building our road there?
I think that any kind of negotiation should think about 4 main stages of denuclearization. And there will have to be incentives along the way, especially in steps 3 and 4. We're already in step 1, which is North Korean moratorium on testing. Step 2 has to be a moratorium on production of more fissile material. And this requires intrusive verification. Because right now, as far as we know, North Korea is still making more bombs, and that's not really acceptable. Step 3 has to be dismantling their ability to make bombs, not just verifying that centrifuges have been shut down, but actually dismantling them, actually dismantling plutonium reprocessing facilities and nuclear reactors. And then step 4 is the actual disarmament, the weapons going out of the country to some agreed custodian or third party or what have you.
Mr. O'Hanlon, one of the things that the U.S. has committed, at least by President Trump, whether he means it or not, is that the U.S. is going to address the security concerns of the DPRK. But here's the thing, if that to be done, what has to be done in stages by the United States to prepare for final fulfillment of that promise toward the DPRK? Whether it is legal procedure, political preparedness back at home, inside the United States, U.S. working with allies such as South Korea, and also working with countries such as China, which were part of then the issue during the war. So how would that work? Has the U.S. States thought about that? What would be the stages the U.S. has to follow on its own about this?
It's a great question. I think the different tools we have at our disposal, we could scale back some of the exercises, but we still have to do a lot of exercises to stay prepared. North Korea still has a 1 million-person army, chemical and biological and nuclear weapons, so we have to stay prepared, but we could scale back the size. Second, we could talk about signing a peace treaty. I'm a little different than many people on this. I think we could sign a peace treaty very soon, because I would welcome North Korea's commitment not to attack South Korea. And it wouldn't have to imply complete normalization of diplomatic relations. We could save that for later. We could also imagine deployment of an international monitoring force along the DMZ to verify that both sides were complying with their obligations under a peace treaty. Over time, we could rethink the size and scale of the U.S. military presence in Korea, but I do not think that should happen now because it's already a very small presence compared to the size of North Korea's army. So that one, I believe, we should actually hold until we get closer to step 4 of what I was talking about earlier, the disarmament phase. And even then, I do not believe that we should link the entirety of the U.S. ROK alliance to a denuclearization path. We may have very good reasons, and South Korea may have very good reasons to keep an alliance even after denuclearization, but it could be a much smaller military footprint.
Professor Lee, I know over the past few episodes of our discussion, you are somewhat apparently reluctant to talk about what the U.S. can do for its preparedness for a negotiation. But if I ask you to help us understand better about the different stages, if the United States was ever committed to a security guarantee for DPRK, what would you say?
Well, the U.S. has put down in ink security assurance, security guarantee. It's in the 1994 Geneva Accord, for example. The two Korean states have signed in 1991 a mutual non-aggression and reconciliation agreement. But these agreements on paper have been rather meaningless because North Korea has violated each one of them. And the question as to why then North Korea insists on a peace treaty is a complex matter. A peace treaty would make things a bit complicated for South Korea because South Korea would have to, in officially recognizing the North Korean state in terms of treaty law, would have to revise its constitution. A peace treaty sounds very wonderful, but it would call into question the very raison d'etre of U.S. troops in the South. So, as counterintuitive as it may sound, I would not be surprised if President Trump, doing things in an unconventional way, as he does, even surprises President Moon and says, the U.S. plans to withdraw some troops, a few thousand or maybe 10,000 troops from South Korea very soon, and offer that as a concession to Kim Jong Un. And the reason for that happening might be that President Trump, in his own mind, may be thinking this sends a severe warning to both North Korea and South Korea. It sends a message to the North: we may be more amenable to striking first if you don't comply, and to the South, we will maybe abandon you, let you, cope with the North Korea problem on your own in the future if you are not with us 100%.
We understand, Mr. O'Hanlon, for example, in the trade dispute discussion between China and the United States, within the U.S. team, according to some media reports, there were spars already happening among themselves, and they did not agree with one another when they are trying to negotiate with the other countries. Will similar situation happen, many wonder, in Singapore during Trump's summit with the DPRK leader? Will also the U.S. team, in a way, fighting within itself? And if that were the case, how things will be resolved or evolve from there?
It's an interesting question. I don't expect that it'll be a large U.S. team. I could be wrong. I don't think, for example, you would have to have Secretary Mattis there, because I don't really think you're going to get into detailed discussions about exactly which U.S. troops would move where. Again, I don't think that should be on the negotiating table right now anyway. So my guess is that Secretary Pompeo is the key person as an advisor and aide to President Trump, and as a person with his own relationship now with President Kim. John Bolton would probably want to go, and perhaps will go, but my own view is that Pompeo is the person everybody could agree is well-informed, understands the different sensitivities, and is probably closest to Trump and closest to the process. So I would think he would be a good part of the team. Beyond that, it's just speculation for me.
Thank you so much for being with us. Michael O'Hanlon, I understand you have to go to other meetings. Thank you for being with us. But let me go to you, Professor Lee, also about the same question. What is likely to be the U.S. team if there is going to be a team?
Well, I mean, President Trump and Kim Jong Un just could meet tete-a-tete with interpreters present. What does that mean? It means perhaps a more frank exchange of views, better camaraderie perhaps, or hostility. We'll have to see. But let me remind our viewers, Mike Pompeo has met with Kim Jong Un twice in about 40 days now, and has reached some kind of an understanding, even a personal rapport perhaps. But he's the one who not so long ago said, very provocatively, that the U.S. has to separate Kim Jong Un, the regime, from its nuclear weapons. What does that mean? It means there's a strong implication that the U.S. must remove Kim Jong Un from power. That was considered to be a very provocative statement less than a year ago, and now Pompeo is viewed as a softliner compared with the National Security Advisor Bolton.
I see. Well, Mr. Ye from China, it is not just the United States and the DPRK that's really paying attention to the summit on June the 12th. It is everybody. China too. China said China welcomed the efforts coming from both sides walking toward one another in terms of seeking solutions to the problem. What will be China's role from now on?
I think China still has the potential to provide a very useful mediator, to play as a very useful mediator for the negotiation. We can recall the history. There was only 3 countries peacefully dismantled their nuclear capacity. One is Kazakhstan, one is Ukraine, and another one is South Africa. South Africa is a very special case. We can focus on the Kazakhstan and Ukraine. Actually, these 2 countries' denuclearization process is guaranteed by the international community, not only guaranteed by only 1 or 2 big powers. So related to the DPRK case, I think only the commitment made by Donald Trump won't make DPRK feel satisfied or feel confident. So still, international guarantee is very important part. But I would like to put another additional discussion is that if American side thought is that negotiation or discussion in Singapore will be the one side raise the condition, another side will take the action, and then one side will observe what the achievement they already made and then think that for the next. Such kind of the pattern won't work because obviously DPRK is looking for an equal negotiation. That means one side make the step, another one will follow one. So they will be a kind of a pattern. Not only so one country raise a lot of questions and waiting for the answers.
Got it. Yeah, Professor Lee. Therefore, the so-called step-by-step by two sides that goes parallel would become extremely important. Besides their own countries, such as the DPRK and the U.S. thinking about this, do you think the other parties of the previous mechanism, six-party talk, could be of any help?
I think so, because it's always in the best interest of the United States and its allies, South Korea and Japan, to share the burden, to share the blame of failure, and to have more witnesses, more vested parties, crucially China, in the room. But at the same time, we have seen in the past all these terms laid out in ink, in writing, in return for North Korea's moratorium, freeze, no more tests, revealing certain facilities, coming under the inspection of the IAEA and so on. The U.S. would do this, provide food and fuel, as the U.S. has in the past. But such action-for-action agreements have not really progressed beyond the initial phase. And I don't see many reasons to be exuberant, to be optimistic that this time around we may have further progress just by the virtue of the leaders of North Korea and the U.S. sitting down together.
Well, we'll see how things evolve from here. Things are changing very fast as we speak. Thank you so much, Sun Young Lee and Ye Hailin. Really appreciate, gentlemen, for being with us.